Most people wait for a sign, a movement, a gesture, something clear enough to confirm that this is the moment something changed. But with a cat, the moment that matters most doesn't arrive like that. It arrives quietly, hidden inside what doesn't happen. And if you're only watching for action, you'll miss the exact second your cat stops being afraid of you. There's a moment that doesn't look like anything important. Your cat is nearby, not especially close, not especially far. Just present in a way you've seen countless times before. Familiar enough that it no longer asks for your attention. And yet, something has changed. Not in a way that announces itself, not in a way that asks to be noticed, but in a way that quietly alters the space between you. They're not watching you the same way anymore. There's no tension behind it, no calculation, no careful distance being maintained. Just a stillness that feels different. And most people miss it completely. Because what they're looking for is movement, a gesture, a clear signal that something has shifted. But when a cat lets go of fear, it doesn't happen like that. It happens in the absence of things that used to be there. Fear that hides inside normal behavior. Humans tend to imagine fear as something obvious, something active, something that shows itself clearly through avoidance, aggression, or withdrawal, a reaction that confirms something is wrong. But for a cat, fear is often much quieter than that. It doesn't always appear as distance. It appears as control. A cat that is afraid doesn't necessarily run away. Instead, they manage the space around them carefully. They adjust their position in subtle ways, staying just outside of something, not close enough to feel exposed, not far enough to lose awareness. They remain present, but never fully at ease. And because this doesn't look dramatic, it's often mistaken for calmness. But it isn't calm. It's calculation. Every movement is measured, every position chosen with a purpose. Even stillness carries intent. So when fear exists in this form, it becomes almost invisible. Not because it isn't there, but because it has learned how to hide inside normal behavior. What actually disappears? When a cat lets go of fear, it doesn't replace it with something obvious. There's no sudden affection, no dramatic shift in behavior, no clear before and after moment. Instead, something very specific disappears. The need to manage you. They stop adjusting themselves around your presence. They stop calculating distance. They stop preparing for what might happen next. And what replaces it isn't action. It's the absence of hesitation. They sit without repositioning when you move. They remain where they are, even when your attention shifts. They exist in the same space as you without constantly redefining it. And this is the part that often goes unnoticed. Because nothing new has appeared. Something has simply stopped. Why it fades slowly. Letting go of fear isn't a decision. It's not something a cat chooses in a single moment. It's something that dissolves gradually, layer by layer, over time. Because fear, for a cat, isn't based on logic. It's based on patterns of unpredictability, interruption, and movement that didn't make sense to them. And these patterns don't disappear just because time passes. They change only when new patterns replace them. Consistent ones, quiet ones, predictable ones that don't demand anything in return. And as these patterns repeat, something begins to shift. Not in how the cat behaves, but in what the cat expects. And expectation is where fear lives. Connection built on predictability. For humans, connection often grows through interaction, through effort, engagement, visible exchange. But for a cat, connection is built through predictability. Not excitement, not intensity, but consistency. The kind that doesn't ask to be noticed. The kind that doesn't suddenly change. When your movements become predictable, your presence becomes easier to understand. When your attention becomes stable, it stops feeling intrusive. And when your behavior follows patterns that don't disrupt their sense of control, something begins to loosen. Not because you've proven something directly, but because nothing unexpected keeps happening. And over time, that absence becomes meaningful. A shift in how you're perceived. As fear fades, something deeper changes, not just behavior, but perception. A cat that once experienced you as something to monitor begins to experience you differently. Not as a variable, but as a constant. And constants don't need to be tracked. They don't need to be calculated. They don't require continuous attention. They simply exist. This is when a cat can be near you without watching you. When they can rest without adjusting to every small movement. When your presence no longer creates a subtle tension in the background. And again, nothing about this is obvious, because it doesn't create a new action. It removes an old one. Why it's often misread. Most people expect trust to look like closeness, like a cat coming onto their lap, seeking attention, initiating contact. Something visible, something undeniable. But letting go of fear comes before all of that. And it doesn't look like affection. It looks like neutrality. A cat choosing not to move away. Not because they're tired, not because they didn't notice, but because they didn't feel the need to. And this moment often passes without recognition. Because it doesn't feel like something gained. It feels like nothing happened. But something did happen. Something that took time. Something that required consistency. Something that couldn't be forced. Trust as the absence of tension. Trust, for a cat, doesn't arrive as a feeling. It arrives as the removal of tension. It's not something added to the relationship, but something subtracted from it. The small calculations, the quiet hesitations, the constant awareness that once existed in every shared space. And when those things are gone, what remains is simple. A presence that doesn't need to be managed. A space that doesn't need to be controlled. A moment that doesn't need to be interpreted. And in that simplicity, something rare appears. Not closeness in the way humans define it, but something quieter. Something that doesn't need to prove itself. What it really means. When a cat lets go of fear, it isn't just about comfort. It's about how they now understand you. Not through individual actions, but through patterns that have repeated enough times to become reliable. It means your presence no longer creates uncertainty. Your behavior no longer requires interpretation. The space between you has become stable. And stability, for a cat, is what allows everything else to exist. Not affection, not playfulness, not even connection as humans define it, but the possibility of those things. Because without the absence of fear, none of them can fully appear. Why it can't be forced. This is where many people misunderstand the process. They try to create trust directly, through effort, intention, actions meant to show safety. But safety isn't something a cat accepts because it is offered. It's something they recognize because it repeats. And repetition cannot be rushed, cannot be compressed, cannot be replaced with intensity. Because fear isn't responding to what you do once. It's responding to what you do consistently. And consistency is quiet. It doesn't stand out. It doesn't demand attention. But over time, it becomes undeniable. The absence you don't register. There's a version of your cat you've already learned to expect. A slight hesitation before entering a room. A pause in their movement when you shift too quickly. The way their body never fully settles, even when they stay. It's subtle enough that you stop noticing it. It becomes part of who they are in your mind. Until one day, it isn't there. They walk in without slowing down. They remain where they are even when you move. Their body doesn't hold that quiet readiness to leave. Nothing replaces it. There's no new behavior to mark the change. No clear signal to point at and say this is different. Just something missing. And because you were never looking for its absence, you don't realize you're witnessing trust in its earliest form. The moment it changes, and then one day something feels different. Not dramatically, not clearly, but unmistakably. Your cat is there, close enough that before they would have adjusted, moved slightly, maintained that careful distance. But this time, they don't. They remain, without tension, without hesitation, without that invisible layer of control that once existed between you. And if you're not looking for it, you won't see it. because it doesn't ask to be seen. It simply exists, quietly, completely,